What if the reason you feel tired all the time is not because life is hard, but because you are constantly trying to be accepted? What if the pressure you feel every day is not coming from the world itself, but from the fear of how the world sees you? You wake up before the alarm, your mind already busy replaying yesterday. You remember what you said, what you didn't say, and how others might have taken it. Even before your day begins, you are already judging yourself. You tell yourself this is normal, that everyone lives like this. But deep inside, you feel a quiet heaviness that never really goes away. As you get ready, you choose your clothes, your words, and even your expressions with care. You are not preparing to live the day. You are preparing to be seen. When you step outside, every face feels like a silent evaluation. You walk carefully, speak politely, and adjust yourself again and again so you don't stand out in the wrong way. You want to fit in, to be accepted, to avoid discomfort. People describe you as nice, responsible, and mature, yet no one sees how tired you are from constantly managing yourself. Throughout the day, you say yes when you want to say no and stay quiet when your voice wants to speak. You tell yourself you are being practical, that this is how life works. But each time you ignore your true feelings, something inside you feels smaller. By the time evening comes, you are exhausted, not from work, but from pretending. You sit alone, scrolling through your phone or staring into space, wondering why you feel empty, even though nothing terrible has happened. This is when the truth slowly begins to appear. You are not trapped by your job, your past, or your situation. You are trapped by the need for approval. The courage to be disliked introduces a powerful idea. All problems are interpersonal relationship problems. When you hear this, it feels uncomfortable because it touches something real. Your anxiety, your fear, your self-doubt are not about failure itself, but about how others might see you if you fail. Without realizing it, you have been living your life for an audience. You learned early that being liked feels safe and being criticized feels painful. Over time, you began to believe that your worth depends on how others judge you, so you adjusted yourself again and again until pleasing others became more important than being honest with yourself. The book explains that this behavior is not weakness, it is a strategy, a way to avoid rejection, a way to stay connected. But this strategy slowly becomes a cage. This prison is invisible. It has no walls or locks, only rules you never questioned. Don't upset people, don't be different, don't be disliked. You followed these rules so well that you forgot you ever had a choice. Yet the book challenges you with a difficult truth. If your fear is built on choices, then freedom is also a choice. That realization is frightening because it means you are not powerless. It means you are responsible for the life you are living. As this chapter closes, you can no longer ignore what you see. You understand now that the prison is real, and it exists inside you. The door is right there, but opening it means risking judgment and rejection. You stand still, unsure but awake, knowing the next step will force you to face a deeper question. Why you are always watching yourself, and who you really are when no one is watching. Why do you feel tense even when nothing is happening? Why does your body feel alert, as if someone is always watching, even when you are alone? What if the eyes judging you are not outside, but inside your own mind? You notice it in small moments. When you speak, a voice inside you listens carefully, checking every word. When you laugh, you wonder if it sounds natural. When you walk into a room, your posture changes without you thinking about it. You are not just living your life. You are observing yourself live it. You are both the actor and the critic, performing and judging at the same time. This constant self-watching feels normal to you. You've done it for so long that you barely notice it anymore, but it is always there, quietly draining your energy. Even in moments meant for rest, your mind stays alert. You replay conversations, analyze expressions, and imagine how others might be talking about you. Your body rests, but your mind never truly does. As the book explains, this is not confidence, it is self-consciousness. And self-consciousness is not awareness, it is fear wearing a thoughtful mask. You begin to see when it started. Maybe as a child, when praise felt like safety and criticism felt like danger. Maybe in school, when fitting in mattered more than standing out. Slowly, you learn to look at yourself through other people's eyes. You learn to monitor yourself so you wouldn't make mistakes that could lead to rejection. At first, this helped you survive, but over time, it became a habit, then a reflex, then a cage. The book introduces an uncomfortable truth. You are watching yourself because you believe you are being evaluated. All the time, you believe life is a stage and you are constantly being scored. So you stay alert, careful, controlled. You think this will protect you from pain, but instead, it creates a quiet anxiety that follows you everywhere. You begin to realize something important. When you are watching yourself, you are not present. You are not fully listening. You are not fully feeling. You are living one step removed from your own life. And the reason is simple but painful. You are afraid of being disliked. The book says something that stays with you. When one is overly conscious of how one appears to others, one loses sight of oneself. This hits deeply because you can feel how true it is. You have spent so much time managing how you look that you've forgotten how you feel. You think about moments when you wanted to speak honestly but didn't, times when your heart raced before saying something simple, times when you laughed at jokes you didn't like or agreed with opinions you didn't believe. Every time, the same fear was there, not fear of being wrong, but fear of being judged. You realize now that you are not afraid of people. You are afraid of losing your place among them. This is where the book introduces the idea of purpose. Adlerian psychology says that your behavior has a goal. Even fear has a purpose. And the purpose of your self-watching is to avoid rejection, to stay connected, to belong. This realization changes how you see yourself. You stop calling yourself weak. You stop blaming yourself for being anxious. You see that this habit was formed to protect you, but protection is no longer the same as freedom. You notice how this self-watching affects your relationships. You listen, but only halfway. Part of you is always asking, how am I doing? You want to be liked so badly that you stop being real. And the tragedy is this: the more you try to be accepted, the more disconnected you feel. The book gently points out that this way of living creates a strange loneliness. You are surrounded by people, yet you feel unseen, not because they don't look at you, but because they never see the real you. And deep down, you know why. You haven't shown it. At night, when the noise fades, the questions return. Who would you be if you weren't trying to impress anyone? What would you say if you weren't afraid of judgment? These questions feel dangerous because they threaten the identity you've built around being acceptable. The book does not tell you to stop caring completely. It tells you something more precise. Stop placing your worth in the hands of others. It explains that as long as your value depends on approval, you will never feel secure, because approval can always be taken away. You begin to understand that watching yourself is exhausting because it is endless. There is no final moment when everyone approves and you can finally relax. There is always another opinion, another standard, another comparison, and so you stay tense, waiting for permission that never comes. One line from the book echoes in your mind: freedom is being disliked. At first, it sounds harsh, almost cruel, but slowly, you see what it means. Freedom is not the absence of relationships. It is the absence of fear inside them. It is the ability to exist without constantly checking your reflection in other people's eyes. This chapter does not end with confidence or victory. It ends with awareness. You see the pattern now. You see how often you leave yourself to gain approval. You see how the habit of self-watching keeps you trapped in the invisible prison you discovered earlier. But awareness changes something. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The next time you feel yourself adjusting, monitoring, shrinking, you pause, just for a moment. And in that pause, something new appears. A question: what would happen if you stopped watching yourself and simply lived? The answer scares you, because if you stop watching, you might be seen, truly seen. And that means you might be judged, rejected, disliked. Yet somewhere inside you, a quiet strength begins to form. Because maybe the life you want does not begin with being confident. Maybe it begins with being brave enough to look away from the audience. As this chapter closes, you feel the tension rising. Awareness is no longer enough. Understanding is no longer enough. The next step will challenge the deepest belief you hold, that your past, your fears, and your pain control who you are. And the next chapter begins with a truth that will shake everything you think you know. Your trauma is not your destiny. What if the story you keep telling yourself about your past is not the truth, but a reason you learn to hide behind? What if the pain you carry is real, but the power you give it is a choice you no longer have to make? You sit alone with your thoughts, and your mind naturally drifts backward to moments that hurt, moments that shaped you, words that stayed longer than they should have, experiences you never fully recovered from. You tell yourself, this is why I am like this. This is why you hesitate. This is why you are afraid. This is why you hold back. Your past becomes an explanation for everything you cannot do today. And for a long time, this explanation feels comforting. Because if your past controls you, then none of this is really your fault. But then the book says something that shakes you deeply. Your trauma did not decide your future. You did. At first, you resist this idea. It feels unfair, almost cruel. You think, I didn't choose what happened to me. And you are right. You didn't. The pain was real. The wounds were real. The fear was real. The book does not deny this. It does not minimize your suffering. Instead, it asks a different question, one you have never been asked before. Not what happened to you, but what are you using what happened to you for? This question stays with you. You begin to understand the difference. Your experiences shaped you, yes, but they do not command you. According to Adlerian psychology, you are not driven by causes from the past, but by purposes in the present. That idea feels dangerous because it means your fear has a reason, and that reason is not the past, it is protection. You start to see it clearly every time you say, I can't do that because of what I went through. You are not just remembering pain. You are avoiding risk. You are avoiding judgment. You are avoiding being disliked. Your past becomes a shield, protecting you from the fear of stepping forward. The book explains this gently but firmly. Trauma does not force behavior. It influences it, but the direction you move is still chosen, not consciously, not easily, but chosen. This realization is uncomfortable because it means you are not broken, you are cautious, you are not damaged, you are guarding yourself. You think about how often you tell yourself stories like, I'm just not confident because of my childhood, or I can't trust people because I've been hurt before. These statements feel true, but now you see something else beneath them. They keep you safe from disappointment. They keep you from risking rejection. And suddenly, something shifts inside you. If trauma is not destiny, then your fear is not a sentence, it is a strategy. You don't feel blamed by this idea. You feel seen. For the first time, your fear makes sense. It has been trying to protect you, to keep you connected, to keep you from standing alone. But protection has slowly turned into limitation. The book says something quietly powerful. People are not controlled by their past experiences, but by the meaning they give to them. This sentence changes how you look at your life, because meaning can change. Interpretation can change. Direction can change. You remember moments when you wanted to step forward, but stopped yourself, not because you couldn't, but because you told yourself you shouldn't. Because someone once laughed. Because someone once laughed. Because someone once left. Because someone once made you feel small. And so you learned to stay where it felt familiar. But familiar does not mean free. You notice how often you use your past as proof that the future will be the same. You assume rejection before it happens. You expect failure before you try. You limit yourself not because you must, but because you believe it is safer. The book does not tell you to forget your past. It tells you to stop letting it decide for you. It tells you that pain explains behavior, but it does not justify staying stuck forever. This is where the tension grows, because letting go of the past does not mean it disappears. It means you lose the excuse it gave you, and excuses, while comforting, also keep you small. You feel fear rising. If your trauma is not destiny, then change is possible. And if change is possible, then responsibility returns to you. That responsibility feels heavy because now the question becomes unavoidable. What will you do next? You begin to see that healing is not about fixing the past. It is about choosing differently in the present. It is about acting even when fear remains. The book explains that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to move forward despite it. This idea feels overwhelming. You are not suddenly confident. You are not suddenly free, but you are awake. You see that the story you have been telling yourself may no longer serve you. You sit with the discomfort, with the sadness, with the truth, and you realize something important. If you are not controlled by your past, then the life you want is not impossible. It is just uncomfortable. The chapter does not end with a solution. It ends with a challenge. Because once you understand that trauma is not your destiny, another question rises to the surface. If your fear is not caused by the past, then what is it really for? And as you turn toward the next chapter, you feel the weight of that question pressing in. Because the answer will force you to confront something even harder than trauma. It will force you to face the lie you have been telling yourself about why you stay where you are. And the next chapter begins with that confrontation. The lie you've been using to stay safe. What if the reason you haven't changed is not because you can't, but because somewhere deep inside you don't want to? What if the story you repeat every day is not protecting you from pain, but protecting you from responsibility? You begin to notice a pattern. Every time the idea of change appears, a familiar voice steps in. It sounds reasonable, calm, logical. It says, "This isn't the right time." It says, "You're just being realistic." It says, "You know how this ends." You trust this voice because it feels wise, because it sounds like experience, because it feels like safety. But now, after everything you've seen, you start to question it. You look at your life closely, the routines you repeat, the habits you defend, the risks you avoid. You tell yourself you are being careful, but the truth feels heavier. You are staying where you are because it feels familiar, even when it hurts, even when it limits you. Familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar freedom. The book challenges you with an idea that feels almost offensive at first. It suggests that many people choose unhappiness because it gives them certainty, that staying stuck offers predictability, that the pain you know feels less frightening than the unknown you might face if you move forward. You don't want to believe this. You want to believe you are trapped by circumstances, by fear, by your past. But the book keeps pressing gently, asking you to look again. It introduces the idea that behavior is not driven by cause, but by purpose, that you do what you do for a reason, even when that reason hides from you. You begin to see the lie. The lie is not, "I'm afraid." The lie is, "I have no choice." You tell yourself you are stuck, but the truth is more uncomfortable. You are choosing safety over growth, not because you are weak, but because change demands courage, and courage demands that you risk being disliked. The book says something that cuts through you. People do not change because they are afraid of losing something. When you sit with this, everything becomes clearer. You are not afraid of change itself. You are afraid of losing approval, losing belonging, losing the version of yourself that others recognize and accept. So you tell yourself stories to stay where you are. Stories like, "This is just who I am," or "I need to fix myself first," or "If I change, people will misunderstand me." These stories feel true, but now you see what they really are. They are excuses that protect you from discomfort. You begin to realize how clever the mind can be. It does not lie loudly, it lies quietly. It tells you that waiting is wise, that silence is maturity, that shrinking is humility. And because these ideas sound noble, you accept them without question. But deep down, you feel the cost. Every time you don't speak, resentment grows. Every time you don't act, regret settles in. Every time you choose comfort, your world becomes smaller. The book explains that this lie is often rooted in a false belief about happiness. You believe happiness comes from being accepted, from being praised, from avoiding conflict. So you design your life around avoiding discomfort. But the result is not peace, it is emptiness. You begin to understand that happiness built on approval is fragile. The moment someone disapproves, it shatters. And because disapproval is unavoidable, you live in constant tension, trying to control what cannot be controlled. The lie you've been telling yourself is that this is the safest way to live. It's not. It is simply the least risky. The book does not shame you for this. It tells you that avoiding risk is human, but it also tells you that a life without risk is a life without freedom. And suddenly, the question shifts. Not, can I change? But, what am I avoiding by staying the same? You think about the dreams you've delayed, the conversations you've avoided, the parts of yourself you've hidden. You realize that staying the same has protected you from rejection, but it has also kept you from becoming who you could be. This realization brings a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear, because change now feels unavoidable. Relief, because the problem was never that you were broken. It was that you were playing small to stay safe. One line from the book echoes again and again in your mind. Freedom means being disliked. You finally understand what it means. Freedom is not about doing whatever you want. It is about living without needing permission. It is about choosing your path even when others don't approve. The lie you believe told you that approval equals safety. The truth is that approval often costs you yourself. As the chapter reaches its end, you feel the ground shifting beneath you. You can no longer hide behind the idea that change is impossible. You can no longer blame the past or fear or circumstances alone. You see now that part of you has been choosing this life because it felt safer than standing alone. But something else is waking up inside you. A quiet question. If you stop lying to yourself, if you stop pretending you have no choice, if you accept that fear is not a stop sign but a signal, what would you do differently? The answer does not come yet, but you feel its weight, because the next step will require you to face something even deeper than excuses. It will force you to confront the need that keeps the lie alive, the need to be seen, the need to be praised, the need to be recognized, and the next chapter begins where that need is finally exposed. What is the reason you feel empty, even after doing everything right? It's because you are never living for yourself. What if the hunger you feel is not for success, but for someone to finally look at you and say, you matter? You begin to notice how deeply the desire for recognition runs through your life. It is quiet but constant. It shows up when you check your phone to see if someone replied, when you hope your effort will be noticed, when a small compliment lifts your mood more than it should, and a small criticism ruins your entire day. You tell yourself this is normal. Everyone wants appreciation. Everyone wants to be seen. But this goes deeper than appreciation. This feels like survival. You remember moments when you worked harder than necessary, not because you loved the work, but because you wanted approval. Times when you stayed late, helped more, gave more, even when you were exhausted. You weren't chasing excellence, you were chasing validation. You wanted proof that you were good enough. The book names this clearly, the desire for recognition. And when you finally see it, you realize how much of your life it controls. From a young age, you learned a simple lesson. When you did well, you were praised. When you failed, you were corrected, ignored, or compared. Slowly, your worth became something external, something given, something earned. And so you learned to chase it. You learned to shape yourself into what others wanted so you could feel secure. At first, this desire helped you grow. It pushed you to improve, to belong, to connect. But over time, it became a chain. Because when recognition becomes the goal, you stop asking what you want. You start asking what will be approved. You begin to see how this desire affects your choices. You choose paths that look impressive instead of ones that feel meaningful. You silence opinions that might make you unpopular. You hide parts of yourself that don't fit the image. You are not lying to others. You are negotiating your existence. The book says something that stays with you. When we seek recognition from others, we lose our freedom. You feel the truth of this in your chest. Because recognition is never stable. It can be given and it can be taken away. And when your self-worth depends on it, you live in constant fear of loss. You notice how tense you become around people whose approval you value. You watch your words carefully. You overthink. You perform. And when the moment passes, you feel drained. Not because you were dishonest, but because you abandoned yourself to be accepted. The hardest realization comes quietly. You are not living for happiness. You are living for applause. And applause never lasts. The book challenges another belief you have carried for years. You believe that being recognized means being valuable, that being unseen means being nothing. But Adlerian psychology turns this upside down. It suggests that value is not proven by being special, praised, or admired. Value comes from contribution, not comparison. This idea feels unsettling, because if your worth is not tied to recognition, then everything you've been chasing might be unnecessary. And worse, it means the hunger you feel cannot be satisfied by more praise. You reflect on moments when you finally received recognition, a compliment, an achievement, a moment in the spotlight, and how quickly it faded, how soon you needed the next one. The desire never ended, it only grew stronger. That's when you understand something painful. Recognition does not heal insecurity, it feeds it. The book explains that the desire for recognition is closely tied to competition. When you need approval to feel worthy, you begin comparing yourself constantly. Who is doing better? Who is ahead? Who is more respected? And without realizing it, life turns into a ranking system. You are either winning or losing, accepted or rejected, above or below. There is no peace in this system, only tension. You begin to understand why praise feels good, but never enough. Why success feels exciting, but strangely empty. Why you feel anxious, even when things are going well. Because deep down, you know that recognition can disappear at any moment. The book offers a difficult truth. As long as you live for recognition, you are not living your own life. You are living a life assigned by others. This realization hurts because it means many of your sacrifices were not acts of love or passion, but acts of fear. Fear of being ignored, fear of being ordinary, fear of being unwanted. You don't judge yourself for this. You see now that this desire was shaped by your environment. It was learned, and anything learned can be unlearned. But unlearning it means facing something frightening. It means letting go of the need to be special. It means accepting that not everyone will notice you, not everyone will praise you, not everyone will understand you. The book says quietly, to be free, one must give up the desire for recognition. This sentence lands heavily, because it feels like losing something important, almost like losing motivation itself. You ask yourself, if I stop chasing recognition, what will drive me? The answer doesn't come immediately. Instead, you feel resistance, doubt, fear, because recognition has been your fuel for so long. Without it, you worry you will disappear. But as you sit with this fear, something else begins to rise, a new understanding. That recognition kept you moving, but it also kept you dependent. It kept you running, but never arriving. You begin to imagine a different way of living, one where you act because it feels right, not because it will be noticed. One where your worth is not measured by applause. One where silence does not feel like failure. This idea feels unfamiliar, almost empty at first, but beneath the emptiness, there is a strange calm. For the first time, you consider the possibility that you don't need to be admired to matter, that you don't need to stand above others to be worthy, that simply existing, contributing, and living honestly might be enough. The chapter does not end with certainty. It ends with tension, because letting go of recognition means letting go of a major part of your identity. It means no longer asking, "Do they see me?" and instead asking, "Am I living truthfully?" As you step into this awareness, another truth waits for you. Because once you stop chasing recognition, you must face the moment when no one is watching. No applause, no approval, just you and your choices. And the next chapter begins exactly there, in the moment when you realize when and where you first gave your power away. What if the moment you lost your confidence was not when you failed, but when you decided someone else's opinion mattered more than your own? What if your power was never taken from you, but quietly handed over one small moment at a time? You sit with this question longer than you expect. At first, no clear memory comes, just a feeling, a tightness in your chest, a sense that something important slipped away so long ago that you stopped noticing its absence. You always assumed power was something you lacked, something other people had. But now, you begin to wonder if that belief itself is part of the story you told yourself to survive. Slowly, memories surface. Not dramatic moments, not obvious turning points, just ordinary scenes. A time when you spoke honestly and someone laughed. A moment when you expressed excitement and were told to calm down. A time when you asked for something you needed and were met with silence, disappointment, or judgment. None of these moments seemed life-changing at the time, but together, they shaped you. Each moment taught you something, not with words, but with feeling. Be careful. Don't stand out. Don't make it awkward. Don't disappoint. And so, without realizing it, you learn to adjust yourself. The book explains that power is not control over others. It is control over your own choices. And the moment you began choosing your behavior based on how others might react, you handed that power away. Not because you were weak, but because you wanted connection. You wanted safety. You wanted to belong. This realization doesn't bring anger. It brings sadness. Because you see now that you didn't lose yourself in one dramatic event. You slowly stepped aside again and again until pleasing others felt more important than listening to yourself. You began asking questions like, "What will they think?" before asking, "What do I think?" You remember moments when you felt a strong instinct, a clear desire, a quiet truth inside you, and ignored it. Each time, it felt small, harmless, but each time, it reinforced the same message. Your feelings come second. The book gently exposes this pattern. It says that when you live to meet expectations, you place your life in someone else's hands. Their approval becomes your permission. Their reaction becomes your direction. And without noticing, you stop living your own life. You see how this affects your confidence. When you rely on others to tell you who you are, you feel strong one day and weak the next. Praise lifts you. Criticism crushes you. Silence makes you doubt everything. Your sense of self becomes unstable because it is no longer rooted inside you. You realize now why you feel powerless in certain situations. It's not because you can't act. It's because you've been trained not to. You learn that peace comes from compliance, not expression. That harmony comes from silence, not honesty. The book says something that strikes deeply. When one is concerned with what others think, one is living someone else's life. The sentence doesn't accuse you. It simply reveals the truth. You think about how often you look outside yourself for answers, for reassurance, for permission. You wait for signs, for approval, for someone to tell you it's okay. And every time you do, your power stays out there, just out of reach. The hardest part of this realization is understanding that no one forced this on you. The world didn't steal your power. You gave it away in exchange for acceptance. And while that exchange once helped you survive, it no longer helps you live. You feel resistance rise, guilt, shame. You think, "So this is my fault?" But the book is clear. Responsibility is not blame. Responsibility is freedom. Because if you gave your power away, you can take it back. But taking it back will not be comfortable. You notice how deeply this habit is wired into you. Even now, as you reflect, part of you wonders if this way of thinking is too much, if it's selfish, if it will make others uncomfortable. You catch yourself worrying about being judged for wanting your own life. And that's when you see how strong the pattern really is. The book introduces a concept that sharpens your understanding even more: task separation. It explains that you are responsible for your actions, your choices, and your feelings, but not for other people's reactions. The moment you took responsibility for how others feel, you surrendered your power. You remember times when you stayed silent to keep the peace, times when you changed yourself to avoid conflict, times when you blamed yourself for someone else's disappointment. Each time you crossed a line without knowing it. You took on tasks that were never yours, and the cost was yourself. You begin to understand that power is not loud or aggressive. It is quiet and steady. It is the ability to act according to your values, even when others disagree. It is the strength to stand in your truth without needing everyone to approve. This realization stirs something deep inside you, a sense of loss, but also possibility, because the power you gave away did not disappear. It simply waited. You feel it now, faint but present, in the moment you choose honesty over comfort, in the pause before you automatically agree, in the awareness that you are allowed to decide. The chapter does not end with action yet. It ends with clarity. You see now when your power slipped from your hands, not in one dramatic moment, but in many small ones. And because it happened slowly, reclaiming it will also be gradual. But the direction has changed. As this chapter closes, another truth begins to form. Because once you understand where your power went, you must face the place where most of your pain lives, in your relationships, in your conflicts, in the silent tension between you and others. And the next chapter begins with a statement that feels unsettling but true. All problems are relationship problems. Have you ever wondered why your life feels heavy even when nothing seems wrong? Why tension creeps in, silently, between moments of calm? The answer is simpler and more profound than you think. Your struggles are not just about circumstances, tasks, or failures. They're about the spaces between you and others. All problems, the book tells you, are relationship problems, and that truth is both terrifying and liberating. You wake up to the same small anxieties as before: a text, unanswered, a glance from a colleague, a disagreement with someone you care about. These moments feel like bumps in your day, but the tension lingers long after the incident passes. You replay it in your mind, analyzing every word, every gesture. You feel responsible for their mood, for their opinion, for their reaction, and you begin to see a pattern. The energy you spend managing the feelings of others is draining you more than anything else. You are trapped in invisible negotiations, striving to maintain peace, to avoid conflict, to stay accepted. The book introduces an idea that shakes the foundation of what you thought you knew. It says that life is not about the problems themselves, but about how we relate to them, and especially how we relate to others. Every frustration, every disappointment, every resentment you carry is tied to your relationships, to expectations, to unspoken rules. And the moment you realize this, a strange clarity arrives. Your life is full of problems you don't have to solve directly. You only have to understand your part in them. You remember countless times you argued, not with the other person, but with your own expectations of how they should act. You got angry because someone didn't behave the way you wanted, because they didn't respond as you imagined, because they didn't recognize your effort or your feelings. In your mind, their behavior felt unfair, hurtful, even cruel. But as the book guides you, you begin to see that their actions are theirs, not yours. Their judgment is not your responsibility. Their recognition is not your obligation, and yet you have carried it as if it were. This realization is not immediate relief. It is discomfort, because when you understand that other people's reactions are not yours to control, the ground beneath your assumptions shifts. All the small compromises, the silences, the explanations you offered, the people pleasing, you see them now as ways of handing over pieces of yourself to preserve connection. You traded freedom for acceptance. You traded courage for comfort. And you did it again and again because it felt safer than being yourself. The book challenges you further. If all problems are relationship problems, then the source of your suffering is not external. It is not circumstances, failure, or the past. It is your own stance toward others. The conflicts, the guilt, the resentment, they exist because you carry them, because you take responsibility for things that are not yours. You see that taking on another person's feelings, trying to manage their impressions, trying to earn their approval, is the root of much of your suffering. And suddenly the path to freedom appears. But it is narrow and daunting. Stop carrying what is not yours. Stop solving what you cannot solve. Stop controlling what you cannot control. You think about moments in your life when relationships became complicated, tense, or painful. You see patterns you ignored before, times when you apologized unnecessarily, accommodated excessively, explained endlessly. Each moment was driven by fear, the fear of disapproval, the fear of conflict, the fear of being disliked. You noticed that the more you tried to fix, the more tangled the situation became. The more you tried to control others' reactions, the more restless you felt. And now, through the lens of this chapter, you understand why, the moment you handed over your power to someone else's perception, you created your own suffering. A quiet truth settles in. Freedom and peace come not from controlling relationships, but from separating tasks. This Adlerian concept, introduced in the book, feels almost radical. You are responsible for your actions, your choices, your voice. You are not responsible for how others respond, how others feel, or whether they approve. And yet, until now, much of your energy has been spent trying to manage exactly what you cannot control. Every anxiety, every hesitation, every resentment, it existed because you failed to separate what is yours from what is not. The clarity is unsettling. You recall a time when someone ignored your advice, dismissed your feelings, or reacted harshly. You carried that for days, replaying the scene, wondering what you could have done differently. You see now that their reaction was theirs. Your power to act wisely or honestly did not depend on their approval. And the moment you recognize this, the weight you've been carrying lightens slightly, though fear and doubt remain. But the book does not promise ease. Understanding is only the first step. Applying this knowledge requires courage, the courage to act honestly, even when others disapprove, the courage to speak your truth, even when it risks conflict, the courage to say no when necessary, because relationships are not tools for validation. They are interactions of equals, and the first step toward equal relationships is recognizing that you cannot control or earn another person's approval. You can only control your response, your action, and your presence. As the day unfolds, you test this quietly. You notice when a colleague's criticism pricks at your ego. You pause before reacting, asking yourself, is this mine to carry? You feel the familiar pull to explain, to justify, to defend. But now, for the first time, you consider letting it go. Letting them own their reaction, and letting yourself own your peace. It is uncomfortable, it is strange. And yet, in that pause, you feel a flicker of something you have rarely felt: freedom. The book emphasizes that mastering relationships is less about changing others and more about changing your stance toward them. You begin to see the practical power of this principle. By separating tasks, by refusing to carry what is not yours, you reclaim energy, clarity, and self-respect. You see that every conflict you faced was amplified by the invisible weight of other people's tasks you had been carrying. And as you release them, the world subtly shifts. Interactions feel lighter, less loaded. You feel stronger, present, whole. But with clarity comes challenge. Releasing control over relationships does not mean detachment or indifference. It means courage to stand in your truth while allowing others to stand in theirs. Courage to face disapproval without shrinking. Courage to risk conflict for the sake of honesty. And this courage is not given, it is earned moment by moment. As the chapter closes, you feel both fear and exhilaration. Fear, because the moment you stop managing others' reactions, You may be misunderstood, criticized, or rejected. Exhilaration, because in doing so, you reclaim your freedom and your power. And in that space between fear and liberation, a new question emerges. If all problems are relationship problems, and if your suffering stems from taking on others' tasks, what happens when you finally stop? What happens when you act fully as yourself, unshaken by judgment, free from the need to be liked? The answer awaits in the next chapter, because the journey now leads to the place where freedom begins in practice, not just understanding. The next chapter begins with a confrontation with fear, a taste of courage, and the first steps toward being disliked and finally free. What if the freedom you've been searching for all your life came not from being loved or admired, but from being willing to stand alone? What if the key to living fully is to accept that some people will reject you, and that rejection is not the end, but the beginning? You wake up with a quiet, uneasy awareness. The mornings feel the same, but something inside stirs attention, a question, a possibility. You've begun to see how much of your life has been spent seeking approval, managing others' reactions, and shrinking yourself to fit expectations. And now, you sense that the next step will demand something new, something scary, something radical, the courage to be disliked. At first, it feels impossible. To be disliked sounds like failure, sounds like danger. But the book frames it differently. It says that the fear of disapproval is what keeps you imprisoned, what makes you cautious, what makes you compromise your values and quiet your voice. Freedom is not given, it is claimed by daring to live authentically, even when others resist, misunderstand, or reject you. You think about the moments in your life when you stayed silent to avoid conflict, smiled to hide discomfort, or followed the crowd to avoid judgment. Each memory carries a familiar ache. Each compromise, small or large, chips away at your sense of self. And now, with growing clarity, you see the pattern. The life you've been living was built on a subtle but powerful assumption that being disliked equals danger. And yet, the book challenges this assumption with a striking question. What if being disliked is the price of being free? You imagine the first steps. A conversation you've been avoiding, a decision you've been postponing, a truth you've been afraid to speak. You feel the fear rise immediately. The familiar heartbeat in your chest, the clenching in your stomach. You recognize it as old training your mind, warning you of danger, conditioned by years of seeking approval. And you realize this fear is not a barrier. It is the doorway. The book introduces Adler's radical idea: happiness and freedom are inseparable from the courage to be disliked. It explains that interpersonal relationships are inevitable, but your worth does not depend on universal approval. What others think of you is not your responsibility. Their approval is a gift, not a requirement. And when you accept this, a shift begins. You notice a strange lightness, a subtle release of tension, the first whisper of autonomy. You try a small experiment. In a meeting, you speak your mind without waiting for validation. The words tremble at first, hesitant, unfamiliar, but they are yours. You feel the weight of others' expectations and consciously release it. You notice reactions, some approving, some indifferent, some critical, and you realize, for the first time, that none of it has to control your sense of self. The book calls this separating tasks, owning your actions while leaving others to own theirs. You see the beauty of it. The world is full of judgments, opinions, and expectations, but they only have power over you if you allow them to. And most of your fear, you now understand, comes not from reality, but from the stories you tell yourself about what others might think. As the day continues, you practice this courage in small ways. You decline a request you don't want to fulfill. You express a disagreement politely but firmly. You sit with the discomfort, your heart racing, your mind whispering warnings, and you notice the sensation. It is freedom wrapped in fear. It is risk and exhilaration at once. The book reminds you that growth is always uncomfortable, and that courage is not the absence of fear, but action despite it. You remember past moments of resentment, how much anger, frustration, and exhaustion you've carried from trying to please, appease, and perform. You see now that those burdens were not caused by others. They were caused by your willingness to surrender your choices to them, and the realization is liberating. You feel the possibility of reclaiming your life, piece by piece, choice by choice. The courage to be disliked is not about confrontation or rebellion. It is about honesty, integrity, and self-respect. It is about living according to your values, even if it makes others uncomfortable. It is about understanding that disapproval is temporary, but the peace of living authentically is lasting. And for the first time, you sense the faint outline of a life guided by your own principles, not by the shifting tides of others' expectations. The book emphasizes a paradox that shocks you. The moment you accept being disliked, you become capable of true connection. You are no longer performing, no longer shrinking, no longer pretending. You are present, real, authentic, and authenticity, strangely, attracts people who matter, not because you seek recognition, but because you act from wholeness. You see a vision of yourself standing alone in a room, yet feeling full, alone, yet unafraid, criticized, yet grounded. You understand that the courage to be disliked does not isolate, it liberates. It allows you to engage fully, honestly, and without calculation. The energy you once spent performing and pleasing now flows into creation, action, and love that is unconditioned by approval. The chapter closes with a moment of tension. The fear is still there, pulsing under your skin. The mind still warns, still hesitates, but you know the truth. The next step in your journey will not wait for courage to feel comfortable. It will demand action in spite of fear, authenticity in the face of judgment, and a willingness to stand alone so that you may finally stand fully. And the next chapter begins at the edge of that courage, the threshold, where your life transforms from fear-driven compliance into freedom-driven living. The question that remains, whispering into the darkness, are you ready to act on this courage?